welcome to Capitol Hill. I'm Lyndal Curtis. The Treasurer today delivered the mid-year economic update. It's forecast a slightly smaller surplus at the end of this financial year of $1.1 billion instead of the $1.5 predicted at budget time. It's also forecast slightly slower economic growth this year and a slightly higher unemployment rate. It did deliver some savings. The government moved some spending forward and pushed some spending back to deliver $16.4 billion of what the Treasurer says are savings over the next 4 years. That includes a change to the way companies pay their company tax. Instead of quarterly instalments, they'll be paying them from 2014 in monthly instalments. That brings the government $8.3 billion over 4 years. The government's also made changes to private health insurance to deliver $1.1 billion over 4 years, and also cut the baby bonus for second and subsequent children. Instead of getting the $5,000 you got with your first child, you'll get $3,000. Joining me to discuss the issues today are Labor MP Michael Danby and Shadow Assistant Treasurer, Liberal Senator Miathias Cormann. Welcome to you both.
Thank you, Lyndal. Good to be here.
We'll start with the Treasurer and the opposition leader talking about MYEFO.
What I've said is that we've had a very big hit to revenue. And we've had to account for that by making a whole lot of saves over a long period of time, not just in this MYEFO.
What we saw today from the Treasurer and the Finance Minister was the incredible shrinking budget surplus. We've got scarcely a third of the financial year over, and already a third of the projected surplus has gone.
Michael, when the Treasurer announced that the budget in 12-13 was going to be in surplus on budget night, he said the surplus has been delivered. Today, he's saying it's a forecast when asked if he's absolutely sure it's going to be delivered. Does the smaller the surplus get mean the less likely it is to be delivered?
I don't think so. I think that Labor wants to be a responsible government and to make sure that the money we spent during the global financial crisis is eventually paid back, and we start with a small surplus no matter whether the global financial crisis continues or not. Unfortunately for us, both China, Europe and the United States still remain in recession, and of course our revenues therefore are less than anticipated. So we maintain this paradigm of responsibility, economic responsibility, and a determination to do it, to achieve a surplus, and changes to revenues in the meantime. The Treasurer has made adjustments, and he's made announcements this afternoon which are highly rational, and I support.
And are you, as a backbencher, happy if the government has to make further savings in the May budget before the next election, if the government does that?
Well, depends what they are, of course, but these ones in company tax, in changes to the baby bonus and changes to private health insurance, I think are all defensible, and given the desire to maintain that overall economic responsibility, which in the old days the Conservatives used to support, I think it's entirely defensible at the moment. I think all of us like to know what will happen in the future, and if there are changes in the future, I'm sure the Treasurer will discuss them extensively within the Parliamentary Labor Party.
Miathias, whatever you think of the government, it has had to deal with lower revenues since the global financial crisis. Company tax is not as strong as it was before the global financial crisis, and part of the reason for that is the investment phase in the mining sector. The Treasury Secretary, Martin Parkinson, has also warned that governments are about $20 billion a year down on revenue on pre-GFC levels. Isn't it right that the government has had to deal with substantial write-downs in revenues?
Well, no. I mean, revenue is only lower than one's overly optimistic and always unbelievable revenue expectations at budget time. Revenue today is higher than what it was before the GFC, but of course spending is massively higher as well. And let me just make one correction to what Michael Danby just said. The US and China are not in recession. The government is expecting 7.75% growth in China and 2% growth in the US. I mean, we've got to remember that over the last 4 budgets. The government had the best terms of trade in 140 years. They imposed 26 new or increased taxes, yet they still were not able to live within their means. They still delivered $173 billion worth of accumulated deficits. In May, we were told that 2012-13 would have a $1.5 billion wafer-thin surplus. That has already shrunk by a third, and even that $1.1 billion surplus, supposedly, that is going to be delivered for this year depends on the ATO chasing about $555 million, more than half, out of people's lost superannuation accounts in the 6 months from the end of December to the end of June.
You talk about the high terms of trade, but isn't it the case that mining investment is still going on in order to catch up with the demand, in order to give the supply to catch up with the demand, and it won't be till those investments start delivering product that we'll see company tax go back up?
Well, as a result of massive new taxes and massive increased red tape from this Labor government, mining is not as competitive internationally now than what it was, and the Reserve Bank is on record as saying that they now expect mining investment to peak sooner and lower than originally forecast. Now, as far as the government's revenue estimates are concerned, they have always kept their commodity price assumptions secret, so nobody can actually properly compare what the government's expectations were at budget time compared to what the expectations are now. We do know that commodity prices for coal and iron ore are now 15 to 35% lower than what they were at budget time. And of course, we also know that from when Kevin Rudd first announced the RSPT to the budget, the expected revenue went down from $37 billion to $13.4 billion. And now, of course, Wayne Swan had to take another $4 billion or thereabouts of that, so that we now just are looking in Miathias at $9.1 billion worth of revenue from the mining tax. But terribly, I mean, the government actually only today receives its first mining tax quarterly instalment, and of course one of the reasons the government is rushing this Miathias document out today is to avoid being transparent around how much money they're actually going to raise.
Michael, yeah, but Lyndal, let's remember, Lyndal, that he's talking about us not collecting as much money as we would like, but he wants to make a tax cut, and Mr Abbott wants to make a tax cut for Clive Palmer and Gina Reinhardt, so we wouldn't be getting any of this money. You can't have it both ways, Miathias. Where's your money coming from?
We might, Michael, I just wanted to ask you, Michael, about the changes the government's made to both the private health and the baby bonus. Tony Abbott's right, isn't he, when he says this is hitting families? Is it a hit you're really happy to take, or does it allow the opposition to mount another case about cost of living?
No, they're quite sensible. For instance, with the baby bonus, the first child, you buy the pram. With the second child, there are slightly less expenses. If this is also a paradigm of achieving a responsible budget surplus in changed economic circumstances where we have market prices and therefore changes in revenues and taxes for goods like iron ore and coal, then this is what has to be. This is the world we live in, a market economy. We can't have, us having changed circumstances, a market economy, and saying we should have fixed revenues, especially when the Conservatives, when the opposition, when the coalition want to abolish the mining taxes that they complain are not achieving enough. They want to abolish them altogether. The cost to revenue of what they propose to do is extraordinary and remains, as the Financial Review said, a $70 billion black hole that is completely unaccounted for by Mr Abbott. And you can see, Lyndal, now that the hysteria over the carbon tax is dying, this is starting to catch up with him, and you can see it very clearly in the opinion polls and in the ratings of approved Prime Minister between Julia Gillard and Tony Abbott.
Miathias, while your opposition leader says you would run a government that would live within its means, yet you still have tax cuts you have to deliver, you still have a more generous paid parental leave scheme that you have to deliver, and you're going to increase company taxes to pay that, you would have to hit, wouldn't you, some things which are considered entitlements in order to rein in spending as much as you want?
Well, the first point to make there is that both the carbon tax package and the mining tax package over time both leave the budget worse off. So, I mean, only the Labour Party can come up with multi-billion-dollar new taxes which actually leave the budget worse off. And we, of course, have already said that we will not be proceeding with a lot of these initiatives that were attached to the mining tax and or the carbon tax.
You're keeping some of them, though, aren't you?
And the second point is, well, some of them, and we will find savings in order to be able to afford those. But the second point is that the carbon tax, the mining tax, and more than 21,000 new regulations have actually reduced our international competitiveness. What we want to do is we want to strengthen our economy. We want to grow our productivity more strongly. We want to grow our economy more strongly, because the flow-on consequence of that is not just more economic prosperity for everyone. It actually also leads to more government revenue without the need for all these new and additional taxes that we've been getting under the Labour Party. The problem with all these Labour Party taxes is that they are actually counterproductive. They actually they slow down our capacity to grow our economy, which means that you end up with less revenue, which means that you then continuously have to chase your tail with more new taxes, which again have an impact on our capacity to grow our economy more strongly. So there's some serious work to be done there to make sure that Australia heads in the right direction again.
We might just...
Lyndal, this is the magic pudding economics. You know, you're going to abolish taxes but increase revenues. It doesn't add up. And the Australian people are not silly. They'll make a judgment about who's the responsible
taxes
one.
And reducing the revenue according to the Treasurer, you are increasing
this sounds
taxes
like
and having
economics.
I might just jump in there, because I did want to ask Michael about one other issue. You mentioned the polls, Michael. There's a book by former Labor MP Maxine McHugh due to come out that it's said some people who support the Prime Minister are worried about. Will the timing of the book be helpful for you?
I know this is an insider's, Lyndal, but sometimes Australian cartoonists tell the story better than any politician can. And in the Melbourne Sun today, Mark Knight, as usual, says that's flogging a dead horse. A dead horse. So I don't think it's going to affect the Prime Minister. I'd say one thing about the Prime Minister. I feel very much like the Earl of Westmoreland after her speech, who said in Henry V, God's will, my liege, would you and I alone, without more help, could fight this royal battle. After that speech she made, I'd be happy to go into battle with her against the whole Liberal Party.
And you're not worried about a book that is said to detail some of the discussions, the disputes over the original version of the mining tax?
Look, you know, this is this is an old story. Half of the story that she didn't, that Mr Rudd's advisor didn't meet people isn't true. It's a disappointment, but it's a real side story.
And that's where we'll have to leave it. Michael Danby and Miathias Cormann, thank you very much for your time.
Good to be here.